So here we go. Hi, everyone. Hopefully folks, as they join in, we will keep putting little notes in the chat if it's helpful to help keep people where we are. Folks have just been sharing where they're joining us from, and wanting to say as I start how overwhelmed I'm feeling with gratitude for seeing so many names that we know and alum from the SJTI community first, and then second of all, just seeing how many folks are coming and tuning in from across the country. Before we get started, I want to do a few things. One, I wanted to invite us to think about where we are tuning in from, right? I see all of these cities and universities, and I want to invite us to take the time to think about whose land, whose original folks belong to this land, right? And so I'm tuning in from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the original people from this particular area where I'm sitting were the ancestral homelands of the, and current homelands of the Apache and Pueblo folks. And so wanting to honor that. So if you don't know upon whose land you are joining us from, I encourage you to look that up. Super easy, you can Google that in. And then also to then think about what your relationship is to that community beyond just acknowledging whose homelands this is. So thank you for that. We're gonna have our panelists introduce themselves in a bit, but my name is Carmen Rivera and I'm the moderator for this session. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my day job is that I work at Colorado State University doing organizational development for our Division of Student Affairs. A few logistical things. If you have any questions, we'll have time for our panelists to be answering questions. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom. So if you kind of scroll down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A function there. That way it's easier for us to see. Keep chiming in on the chat around where you're coming in from, but wanting to make sure that we are using the Q&A functions for any questions so that it's easier for us to manage that piece. Excuse me. The other thing is, if you might have noticed the title, it was having us talk about our noticings and learnings based in the time of COVID-19. We started these conversations weeks and weeks ago. And so we had been starting to think about how do we create some space for our communities to be able to think about what does it mean, what are we learning about ourselves and systems and all of the things that we have spent our life really developing in the time of a pandemic. Then during that time, other things started happening. And so if you're wondering, well, are you only going to talk about the pandemic? No, we are not only going to talk about the pandemic. We have to necessarily put it in the context of what is happening right now in our country and across the globe around uprisings to address white supremacy and anti-Blackness in our world. So, and all of the other intersections therein. So no small task for our panelists indeed to kind of share their story and bring voice to how we are going to talk about that kind of time and where we are. If you are new to our community, please visit sjti.org and you can get more information on our panelists. All of our bios are there, but rather than use any of our precious time, in spite of it being a social construct, we would like to invite you all to use the website to get more information about who our panelists are beyond their introduction here today. Before we get started on the panel, I would like to take a second and invite us to all take a deep breath. To get in our bodies and feel and notice where we might be carrying tension and to help release that so that we can be grounded as we engage and enter this conversation in community. If during the course of our conversations, we feel our body tensing up or holding our breath and shallowing our breath, please invite us again to take deep breaths and offer us the pause to be able to be present in this moment for this conversation. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our faculty to introduce themselves and do a quick little check-in about where you are, where your energy is. I've heard some people ask today, in fact, somebody, an SJTI alum, Farine, asked me, what color am I feeling today? And, or how would I, yeah, what color were my feelings today? And so I chose Robin's egg because it's calm, but still cute, you know? And so that was my feeling for today. So wanting to see, have our faculty introduce themselves and kind of do a quick check-in, okay?
Great.
So I'll turn it over to Becky.
Okay. Hello, everybody across the screen. Dr. Becky Martinez, she, her, and hers. It's always important for me to introduce myself as doctor for many, many reasons. I live in Southern California, so, right? I've been on the faculty, I've been with the faculty for 12 years now. I'm a full-time consultant. So this is what I get to do in not just my work, but in my life, and really grounding myself in that space. You know, I woke up this morning and I did some yoga practice. I have a very healthy spinach smoothie that I'm trying to pay attention to my health and recognizing how all of this is impacting my body. And I want to thank Carmen for bringing that in the space. And I also bought a pint of ice cream yesterday. So I'm holding that as I think about where I'm at and how I'm feeling. And I'm feeling the spectrum and just leaning into holding the both and multiple truths. So that's a little bit of me.
And I'll go next. And so good afternoon or morning, depending upon where you're checking in from. I'm Jamie Washington, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I am checking in with you all today from the great city of Baltimore in the state of Maryland. I am on the original homelands of the Piscataway tribe. And so I breathe that in as we start together today. And so I joined SJTI when SJTI started back in 1997 is when we had our first conversations to then move into the first institute in 1998. So delighted to be a part of this community that has meant so much to me for more than 22 years. I serve as the president of the Washington Consulting Group, and a lot similar to Becky, we get to spend our time in the world primarily working with higher education, but also with businesses, corporations, nonprofits, and religious organizations to live into the value and the commitment of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what all that means in all of the different ways that has shown up during our times. I am humbled and honored today to be in a particular contextual moment where I'm standing on the shoulders of many who have gone before me, and delighted to be here with folks who have gone before me and created and paved the way for me to be here, as well as those who will pick up the torch when I sit down. So I'm very clear about the responsibility at this point in my life to prepare the next generation. With that named, again, delighted to be with my family. This is, some of you got to hear us before we got started, so you got to hear some of the back scenes. This is not a performative experience. This is not performative relationships. We are in love, deep love with one another, as challenged and frustrated as we can get with one another as the dynamics of race and gender and class and all that stuff manifests within our own communities. But we do our work and we stay in it together. How I'm doing right now, I enter this space exhausted. I enter this space very present with the nowness. A colleague said the other day, the importance of now and the opportunity that now presents. And so I'm in a nounness space, ready to do the work that is needed for now. holding possibility and hope, as frustrated and challenged as I am many days. I enter this space with joy and excitement about the Supreme Court decision from yesterday. I also enter the space with frustration and doubt and challenge from the timing of that decision on yesterday. So with all of that named, I am ready for us to be engaged today in this conversation. Looking so forward to what we get to co-create in this space together. Thank you all for joining us. Kathy.
I am breathing you both in, feeling deep gratitude, joining you with all you said, and just feeling such love and gratitude for the decades of support, leadership, personal learning, the nudges I've gotten, because I would not be here today as a white person showing up without SJTI, without you, Dr. Becky Martinez, for these. Started before you were full-time faculty, in my opinion. Without you, Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, even before SJTI, because as I hear you both, I always remember in 1997 when I had, Jamie, you were there, very publicly showed up. I had very clear racist behaviors grounded in white supremacist attitudes in the LCY Cross Associates development program. And I chose to go into white fragility for three and a half years before I even talked about those moments, even with you.
Yep.
But what I know is SJTI then and now provides me a space where I continue to do my work, because last night and this morning I worked up in more anxiety and fear about this conversation than I have for the last 3 weeks of white accountability groups that I've been co-leading. And I just think white people might be relating, as I'm feeling not enough, I should be doing more. And all those fears is recentering me. And so I want to honor the folks that might be feeling that in our privileged identity, while we also pick up the call from, I heard Dr. Tanya Williams say, level up. This is not a time to just learn more. This is a time to partner, follow the leadership of folk of color, and be working with white people. And that's how I enter. Deep rage and anger, and also recognizing what can I do well and do it. But even last week, I was in resistance to the defund the police. I was like, how can we do that? You know, there's violence. And then I spent time researching, and now I'm like, oh yeah, we can. And so I show up as a white person today, hopefully deep humility, what I know, do more of that, but also recognizing what I don't know. And I'm in a learning space, but I'm not committed to staying there only. I think it's a time to pivot in action. So I'm open to feedback, but I think we white people, we cannot sit and just keep learning. There's gotta be more. And I also want to name that in the focusing on anti-Blackness and just the violence and murder and lynching of Black folk, I dropped the attention to the violence and racism that the Asian American Pacific Islander community experienced in the first pandemic and continuing in the second pandemic of racism. And it wasn't until Dr. Becky Martinez gently raised that to my attention a couple days ago. And so I enter not holding it all and wanting to, and just knowing that I just have to keep doing more, not in urgency, not in perfectionism, but called to level up.
Thank you for
That's
that.
how I'm entering.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for bringing in Tanya's leveling up concept. I have been connecting with that and resonating with that a lot too, as what is calling to me in this time too. I also want to thank you all for so lovingly bringing your energy into the space today, and also echo what Jamie said, that this is a conversation amongst people who deeply, deeply love each other and have been doing this work for a really long time, and who are also deeply committed to doing this work with each other, not just as a something we teach, but as something that we do with each other too. And so this is not just a panel, for those of you who are new to our community, this is not just a panel of people who have been selected based on their expertise. While there is significant expertise on this panel, it is really rooted in fundamental commitment and love for each other and this work. So wanted to make sure that we named that prior to jumping into some of the questions and the content. So with that, the question that we have asked our panelists to really kind of digest and really share with us is, if you're hearing that noise in the background, I'm in New Mexico, and so it's just the sound of the desert. So there, if you can get some, if you're hearing some of that, just want to name that. Also, I have kids, so they might come running across here. So this is just like a real life kind of webinar, not one in the studio. So, and SJTI holds all of that for all of us too. So the question that we ask each of the panelists to really hold and think about and share their initial thoughts are, is this: what are we discovering / in parentheses rediscovering about race, racism, white supremacy, racial trauma, and racial justice during this time? Originally, like I said, it was about pandemics and being in that space, but now it's gotten way more, way larger than that, right? In this time of chaos, uncertainty, and profound unequal suffering. So that's really this question that will set us up for this panel, and then we'll jump into some dialogue, and then after that, just so you know, that's when we'll have the time for questions for the panelists. Okay, so Jamie, would you like to start us off with that question?
Sure, I will. What have I been noticing? I entered at exhaustion. So some of you who know me know that I was scheduled to go on sabbatical at the beginning of April. And to really kind of take some time to just rest and breathe after this 20 years of nonstop, and to prepare myself for what I want to do with the next 5 years, as I prepare the handoff, right? As I prepare to actively engage the next generation of leaders. And then COVID-19. And so all of that went away. And in the going away of that, one of the things that I noticed is that how critical it is for those of us who have been in and are in the fight to know taking a break matters, and allowing yourself some resting and some restorative space. And so while that has shifted in the way that I've been able to show up, the need for it did not go away. And so I want to just hold, you know, often I hear, particularly in a context like this, Black people or people of color don't have a choice. And I think that is a narrative of the system to kill us, so that we don't ever take time for ourselves to breathe. And if we do, we are somehow not down for the cause. And so I just want to name that. I've noticed that dynamic elevated during this time as folks are overwhelmed and exhausted. Every time I talk to particularly minoritized folks, and Black folks in particular, they are wiped out, right? And it's hard to hold people who are trying to hold other people when everyone is wiped out, right? So that's a very critical piece for me right now. The other pieces that I'm noticing, and I appreciate Kathy naming the dynamic of race as it's shown up in COVID-19. I knew at the beginning that as we were in the crisis moment, in this trauma-informed space, most folks have to move to as we do Maslow's hierarchy, right? First, we got to get safe. We got to be safe. So everybody just go home. Don't talk to, we get food, all of that stuff. So folks were in survival mode. I knew that the initial reports and discussions around COVID-19 were not going to have a race analysis, that we were not going to see the differential impact that this was having on minoritized folks by race. But as the 2 to 3 weeks went on, now not that it wasn't happening and that people who were experiencing it weren't noticing it, but it wasn't going to be public. It wasn't where folks were putting their energy to report. But I knew about 2 to 3 weeks in, we would begin to see the disaggregated impact around this virus on minoritized communities. And when folks began to test positive, who were the essential workers, who was getting sick and dying, whose communities were impacted in differential ways, what young people might not have some of the resources to be able to do schooling at home, what parents couldn't be at home to take it, all of the ways that race would show up. I knew that it would, and we began to look at those as dynamics. So as we began to see those, and that began to shift the conversation, that was my concern that because particularly colleges and universities were really focused on the first thing is get courses back online, get kids out of the residence halls, those that we can't get out of the residence halls, then we've got to figure out what we're going to do with them, because that was where the priorities were, and then who was essential and all that. I was concerned about where diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice, racial justice would fall on the list of things that mattered, right? And as we began to hear the racialized impact, it began to creep back in. And then we have Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd experience, which shifts the conversation or a bit to the, again, the systemic ways that had been in place that had all of those things that I talked about earlier be there anyway, right? But just this was the systemic of police brutality, abuse of power, and violence. What I did notice was there wasn't the same kind of energy and talk about the impact of this being called the Chinese virus. And so for me, it was a reminder of the race narratives that we hold and how APITA folks get left out often of the conversation and the impact of racism on them. Hear me saying that that context is a way to continue to divide us, right? Such that we can't hold why we need to be doing Black Lives Matter, at the same time acknowledge the erasure of the experience that was happening at the beginning of this virus. So that's some of the stuff that I've noticed. The last thing I'll say, because what we all know is that we all can go on. But the last thing that I will say that's been stirring in me most, and I had to call Becky yesterday because I just needed a drink, after the decision from the Supreme Court and the move for LGBTQ civil rights past the writing from Justice. I was excited that this has happened, and I remain challenged by the timing of the announcement. I don't trust it. It is not the first time that LGBTQ issues have been the wedge issue around race. And so it divides communities, it divides the issue, it waters down, and shifts focus. And so while I'm holding in celebration on one hand and want to have all kind of discussions about what that means, right? In that context, in the context of the whole moment of racial unrest, COVID-19, I am holding tension around that announcement. So I can stop there, I've got more, but it feels like to me right now, I have to be in a space where I can hold multiple truths in both ends and not be in either or, because it doesn't serve me.
Thank you so much. Bex, Dr. Bex.
I feel like I need a moment after Jamie just talked, right? Those who have spent any time with me know that I show emotion through tears. And so I'm just really taking at it. It's been a really rough few months. Yeah. So as we entered COVID, what came up for me was all of the like economic, social, class stuff. That's what lies in my body is very dear. And that's what I do my research and my writing on. And I thought, oh shit. Right. So I thought, oh shit for my business. I thought, oh shit for my family and friends that are essential workers. And so like I was really in a place of, woo. And then I appreciate how Jamie said, and then, you know, some weeks went by and what would be the disparities around health, right? Or health care and sickness and numbers of death and where, and I think I became consumed with that. And then I let it go because it was overtaking me and it was unhealthy. Right? And I was lucky enough to be able to talk with most of the people on this screen, like my SJTI folks, especially as we started noticing stuff. As somebody who is in, you may not be, I don't know how it's showing up in your screen, but Jamie is on one side of me and Kathy's on the other side of me, which is so very powerful, right? And as somebody who identifies as biracial outside of the Black and white binary, to be in this, even this virtual space with the two of you on each side, I believe that the universe makes no mistakes, right? Whew. So trying to find my place in all of this, I think how to support folks across race, how to support my community and have it not, or my communities and have it not be selfish. And this is Jamie said, and what I believe is currently happening right now is like race and racism and white supremacy is like strongly working. Like it is a setup and we are clearly seeing what that setup is. And how do we not, as Dr. Tanya Williams always says, don't fall for the game. Right? And so how don't we fall for that game? And how do we not pit ourselves against different minoritized, marginalized identities? And if I think in a race context, how that's set up. And then the intersecting identities of how that's set up. And I loved the call yesterday from Jamie. He's like, I need a moment. And so in this space of how to hold each other and how to find and hold both joy and pain. So Kathy, I appreciated you said, I feel like I'm not doing enough and I'm not enough and we've got to do more. And I want you to know that you're not alone in that. I think that like this same thing from my race lens, right? Like, oh, I should be doing this or I should be going to protest. Like I'm shooting myself a lot. And if I don't recognize that, then I spin in it. And how do I get myself out of that? Because that doesn't do any good, right? I am not able to show up. And then Jamie appreciated needing to take a breather and a break. And also being able to find joy. I had a conversation with somebody the other day and they said, joy is also revolutionary. And I was like, shit, you're right. And it doesn't, and then it doesn't have to be just in a deficit space. And that's where I was for a long time as I think about the last few months. And so community has been extremely important in this chaos, extremely important in seeing how race and racism and white supremacy is working itself out. Seeing how, just seeing how it shows up and what is the work that I need to do, right? While also taking care of myself in all of it. Because that's one of the things that I'm noticing as I've had phone calls. I've backed away from social media a little bit. Now I post pictures of me gardening and things growing. And what I've noticed over the last few weeks, I come from a family of farmers. And so lately I've been doing a lot of weeding, a lot of manual work and a lot of weeding. And some of the roots of weeds are really easy to pull out. And then some of them I gotta dig and I gotta bend over, and they're like interwoven, and that's had me a lot to think about how racism, white supremacy is rooted in me, is rooted in community, is rooted in the country. And some of it is really easy to unlearn, and others it's taking a lot of work. Yeah. Learning a lot from nature in this moment of my work in the world. So I too could continue, and I'm gonna put a pause and hand it over to my colleague, Kathy. Unless you wanted to do that, Carmen.
You got it. You did it just fine. Kathy, take it away.
Just learning so much, taking you all in. Thank you. What I'm reflecting on is the first pandemic, how quickly organizations mobilized. Daily, if not twice daily, leadership teams meeting, other groups meeting, people coming together. And I saw very quickly the folks I was working with or coaching, they were starting to see the gaps in the systems. How are we not serving? And I saw whether it was, as Jamie mentioned, online learning, online services, quickly, how do we fill it? And not this, just fast. And we were asking the questions, everyone that does equity, inclusion, racial justice work, how is this landing across people by first generation, by class, current class, class of origin, by racialized identity, LGBT. We asked full breadth of differences, indigenous status, full breadth, keep going. I heard many people, especially white people, going, I don't know enough. I see there's a gap. And so there was some collaborative with folks who were folk of color and or folks in EDI work. And then about a few weeks ago, started hearing particularly folk of color, indigenous folk say EDI, that's equity, diversity, has been pushed off. We are backburnered. And so I don't know if it's that whites, mostly white leaders, got tired of hearing the nudge, the push. Just even senior equity inclusion folks are telling me, I'm not invited to meetings.
Yep.
And so white supremacy culture, top-down leadership, same way we're doing it. So it's fine when you're talking about the pandemic and how we're gonna reopen K-12, but as soon as you start asking about our culture, our climate, and that systemically we have institutional racism and classism and homophobia, right, sexism, and those gaps are so evident, then I'm seeing white leaders, again, I'm at just like pulling together and keep everybody else out. So that is going on. And then there are some white folks that are speaking up and out, as I do see more white folks since the murders and lynchings of especially George Floyd. A mobilization of whites. My wife said the other day, all the New York Times bestsellers, top 10 are all race-related books. First time in its history, right? I was on with white educators, social justice folks last night, said all their white accountability groups that they've been doing, some for 16 years, have just been ballooning. So I see more whites maybe moving out of denial, or I'm not gonna be a part, and going, I better do this for whatever reason. So I do see energy. My fear is, from what I know about we as white people and my own experiences, whites are like, okay, I'm here now. So white savior, let me show up. I know what to do. And the harm we continue to do out of either or thinking, I deserve a right to conflict, white fragility behaviors, I could keep going. But I just, from my soul, any white people listening, if you are wanting to or doing any racial justice work at all, either in the system, in the community, protesting, that you are actively in a white accountability group of some kind, whatever its name, to really do your self-work. Because I have found myself re-triggered into arrogance. I know what's right. I know what we should be doing. Urgency, and I, even in my voice, well, if you know me, this is how I usually talk, but trying to balance, rise up, do, and not be in that white supremacist urgency and perfectionism, and I know what's best. I'm the good white. The other thing I've been hearing and noticing is how white leaders have been offloading racial justice work now. So with the second pandemic, I think white leaders have been totally fucking frightening, and they don't know what to do. And so they're calling on folk of color now. And to be honest, if I was, I'd be like, why didn't you call them, right? And no, and so with the exhaustion, the overextension already, we whites have not been doing our job for decades and centuries. And now we show up attending a meeting and it's like, now I know what to do. I am deeply concerned about the racialized trauma, current dynamics for folk of color, indigenous folk, cumulative impact, and then generational and group level. I don't have answers, but I do believe and know that counseling centers and community organizations are woefully underserved, understaffed, underfunded, and inadequate. And then the competencies of particularly white counselors is significantly woefully. And so that's just one area. And so I don't know the answers to some of the questions, but I do believe racialized trauma has always been under-addressed. And in these times, that is just one of many areas to look. And then the last place I'll probably chat about, we have to pivot, and we'll talk more as we go. But white people, this is a time to pivot, and it's a time to mobilize as much as we did in the first pandemic. Collectively, and we cannot say people of color, okay, lead now. It's got to be a collective leadership of, collectively, and if one more white leader turns to a person of color and says, will you help me write the statement that we're going to put out? We are beyond statements. We are beyond listening sessions. We are beyond surveys. We're done. All you have to do is just stop, look at all the data you have for just literally 1 hour, and you know exactly some of the things we need to be doing. Now, what you don't know is how to do it. Right. But we're done. It is a time for action, informed, thoughtful, collaborative action, transformative change. If not now, as a Haitian American Black man said yesterday, if we don't do it now, I don't know if we'll see it in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for those initial responses. I think that I hear so much in all of your responses that I'm like, yes, 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 and yes, and yes, and yes, right? And how many folks on this panel and in this chat have dedicated so much of their life's work trying to help our communities, our institutions, our organizations, our families to address some of the very things that you all have talked about today. And so I want to invite us to be in, the panelists to be in a little bit of a dialogue, right? In SJTI, we often talk about the head and the heart and the guts and all of that aligning and pushing us more to the guts part, right? Not the cognitive, this is how we understand this problem, but how are we doing this together in community, and how are we managing and making meaning of our emotions in this time, and what is the impact on the thoughts that you just shared? What is the impact on you and your communities based on the thoughts that you just shared? So any of you can start, and we'll do this for a little while, and then for folks attending, we'll be opening up the questions, going to the questions right after this dialogue part.
All right.
Well, I usually lie in my heart.
Love it. Love that space. It's a good space.
Right?
Love your heart.
In my heart, and then I ask questions. Like, those are the things, right? And so even in this time, I've been asking myself a lot of questions. Somebody had put, how is like race is set up? And for me, it is pitting communities against each other, and how that like takes over my body. Like that just makes me pained and enraged and angry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And trying to hold it all. And really needing to back away from judgment. Whew. I think that that's been one of the things that's really been, is I think emotion and impact. It is how not to judge myself. How am I judging others? Because I am. How am I paying attention to how that shows up in my relationships and in my work? I don't know. That's a little bit of kind of where I'm at as I think about emotions and impact.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind of holding head and heart. I can relate to so much that has been said, and I am, you know, folks often think that I am an ENFP or T. But folks often experience me as a deep feeler and connecting to people at the feeling level. And I am very much an ENT. And so I enter thinking. And so I go to logic. And so I will often push feelings away. And some of that is about the patriarchy and maleness. Some of that is about my racialized experience to not have to deal with and feel the pain of racism. So don't feel it, think about how to solve it. And some of it certainly shows up around the trauma from being same gender loving person, don't feel, right? So I get that. And so what I relate to is what Kathy was naming around the notion of that I can get right into doing, right? And so I honor that we have collected enough data, we know enough information. We don't need to do another survey, another listening session, another focus group to figure out figure out that we need to do what all of those surveys have already told us. If we would just start doing some of that stuff, we could begin to move some of our institutions along, right? So we know that there's been, you know, climate surveys and diversity steering committees and listening sessions and student organizations, Black faculty and staffs, minority people of color have said, here's what's happening in this context that will help to address systemic change. No, we're not pretending like all those things are easy, but let's get to work. Let's get chipping away at some of that. My concern is that for some folks in power and in leadership and operating out of white supremacy, and that colleague I'm working with right now, just we're doing an activity in a session that says, when are you white? And so we had a moment of when that question was asked in terms of the activity. I said, is that for white people? She said, no, that's not for white people. Not just for white people. I was like, ooh, let me sit with that, right? I was like, and what came up for me is how we can, as minoritized folks, be in collusion and be gatekeepers of status quo. And so that we can get into this, do these 4 things that they demanded that we do, so we can check them off without having done the work that we needed to do to really understand the problem. So I join you, Kathy, in that the listening sessions don't need to just hear what people are saying is a problem anymore. I think that we do need to have some engagement sessions so that folks fully understand and believe what's been said, right? Like I heard it, but I don't really understand it, but you're saying do this. And so I can check that off and say that, well, we did hire this person. We put that much more money in that. We did that. And that what I'm learning in the difference in culture change and culture transformation. Folks are just getting their minds in the DEI space around culture change, but not around transformation. Change is based upon events and activities, and transformation is based on attitudes and culture. And so that's kind of where I'm landing, and really hoping that we can think about this conversation in a culture transformation space. And this is an opportunity moment. The deepening of our understanding around anti-Black racism and how that shows up, the deepening of our understanding around the narrative that pits all minoritized folks against one another. And so APITA folks and DESI folks and brown folks and Latinx folks and Native American and indigenous folks, right? All, and mixed race and multiracial folks and Black folks, all in that, as long as we operate from the narrative of scarcity, that we can then maintain kind of status quo. But you know, one of my favorite lines is, when people are in pain, they don't hear as well.
Right.
And so, as you said, Becky, I work to stay out of judgment of people's pain, right? Because when they're in pain, they may not be behaving the way I want them to behave.
Right.
Right? Like, I wish they wouldn't do that, right? But just having to be, you know, kind of present with folks in that. And you know, at the same time, as you all know, that I do hold both end, and, you know, white people, you know, I know you trying. I know you doing the best you can. I do. And I hold that. Now, some of my best friends are white. And don't call another Black person or person of color and ask them how they're doing right now. Don't just, your heart is in the right, just don't do it. Because it's just not landing well, especially if you don't have a relationship, right? I mean, if you've got really good relationship, people can find the space. But I just want you to know, we have been inundated with that question, right?
Right.
And then without the ability to say, I really don't know what else to say. So that authenticity might take us somewhere else, right? That vulnerability might take us somewhere else. But it feels to me often as performative, right? Oh, I got to call the Black people, make sure they're okay. So they said they could say I checked on them. So I'm going to need us to really do that differently.
Yeah, I appreciate so much of what you're saying. And I think both Bex, you often live in the feeling space and in the heart space, and you can really make meaning and understanding from that space. And I think Jamie, where you are talking about that thinking spaces that are jump to analyze and make sense of things, often absolves us from that feeling space. And it isn't until you get those pointed questions like, how's whiteness showing up in you, or how are you white? How are you white? Where you're like, oh, they must be talking to white people. And then you all of a sudden have this visceral like shock, right? Where you're like, oh, hold up. Those are the moments I feel like where even the story of like, don't fucking text me one more time. Those are the places where we get outside of that kind of really linear, logical, white socialization.
That's right.
Around what we need can want to do to move. Kathy, did you want to jump in here? Couple minutes.
About the day or two after George Floyd was assassinated, Rachel Forrester emailed me to said, want to do some white accountability spaces, you want to do it. 2 days later, we launched them. We didn't know what we were doing. We just took what it was and just put it out. Our first whole 90 minutes was at how you identify racially, how are you feeling? And we did that large group, we did that small group, because as a white person, and ever since that's our first question, wherever I am, I'm asking first, how are you feeling? Because I want whites to get to rage. I want whites to get to grief. I want whites to get to sad. And we no longer, this is enough, not guilt, shame, you know, split second, acknowledge it, work it in white accountability groups, but don't do that feeling work on other folk of color, multiracial folk, indigenous folk. That's our work to do with other white people. We have to get to our deep rage and our deep pain when we see another Black person murder, right? Having the Navajo have some of the highest rates of pandemic illness and I think death than 7 states is what I saw this week. Right? And to hold it all and all those feelings, I'm incompetent, I'm not enough, but not stop there, because the next session we did was, what were the racist attitudes that Amy Cooper probably fueled her weaponizing white privilege to call the police to come out and then probably kill Christian Cooper in Central Park? And so yes, get with emotion and then start doing your work around your own racialized attitudes, behaviors. How are we just like Amy Cooper, Chauvin, because that's the work we're doing. And then what I'm doing now, I want to share that I'm asking white leaders that I'm coaching today is, what is your passion and vision for what you envision as possible? What is, instead of swirling in, it's never enough, damned if I do, damned if I don't, no matter what I do, they're not happy, right? I hear that from every white person I've ever coached and or been in white accountability groups with, and I have felt that even these last few months. Yesterday got the insight, shift that thought from it's never enough to it will never be enough until fill in the blank. And then I started feeling lighter. I'm like, it will never be enough until, and so I've started working with white leaders these last, what is racially just? What is inclusion? What could dismantling white supremacy really look like? And it just raises the energy and vibration. And if we can also hold on to that, what I found is whites go into their passion and their commitment. And then I say, here's what I'd love you to be able to say. We are committed in this college. We're committed in this organization to eradicate racism. That's where we're going. And I've been calling it a moonshot these last couple of days. That level of passion, commitment. I don't feel incompetent. I don't feel I'm not enough when I'm in this energetic space. Now I will be, because I'm up and down emotions. And as we work with white people and leaders, how to call us to our highest selves while we also hold all those emotions and pivot into naming, we are here to dismantle, eradicate racism in this organization, in our communities. And we are going to mobilize and hold people accountable for that. You set that as your goal. Who knows what kind of ideas will be reconsidered, because now white people will think it's a good idea that 4 centuries ago, well, that was a little exaggerated, 4 decades ago was in the report from. All feelings for white people, focus on it, hold it all, but find your rage and grief and your passion and your willingness to stay in it for the long haul. Because when the media has gone away from protests, I think some whites in our communities have said, oh, COVID's over, protests are over, because we have to keep it on the radar of everybody for at least 24 months and then more. But systemic transformational change, dismantling racism, 24 months minimum, boom, in my opinion.
In my opinion.
I love it. Right. There we go.
Yeah.
You'd have thought Kathy took the preacher. The Reverend.
Can I also add, Kathy, as I hear you speak and appreciate all that you do and who you are, I also want to remind whites that you can't fucking do it all. Right? And so like this need to show up in perfect ways and spaces, like it's messy.
It is.
Right? Let's be in the mess. Like support each other in the mess and name when the mess is happening. I think that's the other thing that will create like angst or like, oh, it's got to be perfect, or I'm going to be a do-it-all. It ain't gonna, like, let that go. Right? Like I even have to name that for myself, that I have to let that go. Right? And be real about, okay, so what is it that I can do? How can I leverage? How can I be a voice? How can I look at systems? How can I say not another damn assessment? And be willing to, like, there's going to be resistance. There's going to be pushback. You're going to lose clout. Like, you got to be willing to give all that up, right? Yeah, so that's the stuff that I would add as I hear you.
So good.
Absolutely.
So there's a good number of questions in the Q&A box. So I want to see if we can get to those. Are you feeling okay if we move to that?
Works for me.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure you don't have any biting things to share before we move to that. So there are a couple questions that are related in terms of our institutions. And I know there's a lot of higher ed folks here, but there's other folks outside of higher ed on this call that I want to make sure that we're not just like framing it solely from higher ed. But I think that this is a pretty across the board approach to how we address things, is that we send things to committee to die, right? So somebody was like planning committee, somebody was saying, how do we, you know, moving to task forces or any of those things, right? So, and then another person related to this, I think, are that people want to go to research and statistics to kind of address these kinds of things. And so I'm pulling these two things together because I think that's where a lot of institutions start first. Is like, what do we already know and what do we need to further know in order to then create a task force or a planning committee or a working group to address these things on campus. So how would you recommend responding to, we need to look at the statistics, we need to look at the data, and then create a committee? How do you suggest that folks who are in their institutions from multiple places of power and or influence try to keep that from happening?
So I'll try to jump in, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question. So the tension or the challenge is more data. So we have data. We're looking at the data to form a committee to decide what to do or how to do it. And so how do we manage that? Well,
yeah, that's usually the trajectory, right? Is that that's how they, institutions of any size, say, what's the data? What does the data say? What do the data say? And then then once they kind of get that, although Kathy and you all have said this in multiple ways, that they already have the data. So what do the data say? And then then let's start a committee to address that, what the data say.
Well, so one of the things that, again, I know that Kathy and I and Becky, we've all talked about is that that if we did racial justice and social justice like we did COVID-19, those committees moved, right? Those committees got strategic. Now, it wasn't all perfect, right? We learned, that's why we're in some space where we need to do some backup and learn some stuff and so on and so forth. But there was some information gathering, some figuring out what we needed to do, and there was some getting moving on doing stuff, right? We did not take 3 to 5 years to take it through faculty senate and then another 4 years through student government. And then, you know, by this time, everybody in those groups have died. And now we need some more people to look at it again. So we ain't do all that, right? We had to move, and we got moving. And so I think the opportunity right now is to say, you did it with this. Like, we get to refer, we get to use this moment to say, this is the posture that we need. But we do need a strategic moving committee. So on all of our campuses and organizations, there were some folks who were looking at the problems, what we had to do, some implementation teams, some people were responsible for this part and responsible for that part. And that's some of the work that needs to happen right now. So if we're putting together the committee that has done we're pulling the group together to look at what the work is that's already been done, and then we are strategizing around how we move, I think that's what we get to do, all right? There is no one right way. There is no perfect way. We're gonna learn some stuff. We're gonna make some mistakes. We're gonna do our best thinking, but we get clear about what the intention is. What's the vision? The vision is for all of our students to be able to be back in their classes in 2 weeks. That's the vision. right? That's the intention. And we forgot about we needed that. We forgot about we needed that. Okay, so we've got to then address that. But the vision is to have Black folks, Latino folks, Lapita folks, mixed race folks experience. Okay, let's get moving. Do this, and we learn stuff on the way. So that's what I think we just have to get strategic, and it does take intentional, strategic leadership to move these efforts forward. And that leadership simply cannot come only from the ground up. It cannot only come from the ground up. Right. So those in position of power and authority have to show up taking responsibility, just as we did in this pandemic. And I think we have to use it as a model for movement.
Kathy.
In my opinion.
So building, I'll just tell you that feedback, coaching, I hope you do it, please, to a white president yesterday. Besides saying we're going to eradicate racism, that's what we're doing. We're pivoting. We're going to similarly mobilization. I said, so tell your entire leadership team. So this was what yesterday, I don't know, Monday. By Thursday, I want a 1 to 2 page beginning plan of what are all the policies and practices that you're going to have people analyze with a racial white supremacist lens, and how are you going to mobilize everyone, hold them accountable, and skill them up. 1 to 2 pages. And then in the next week, and then Friday, we will talk about as a leadership team. And then by next Thursday, I want every one of your direct reports, similarly on my desk, president, what are all the, again, it won't be complete, policies, practices, services that we need to analyze with a race, white supremacist lens, and a plan, again, high level, of how we're going to mobilize, develop, and hold everybody accountable. And I called it a moonshot. Because if you say, this is what we're doing, and then you say, we're doing it in a line of supervision, not another committee, we are doing a line of supervision. You don't think you're going to stir all kinds of energy and possibility. And now, it may not be able to be that quick, because you could have seen her eyes when I said that. But at the same time, be saying to any security, any police, any party organization that has a memorandum of understanding, is that it? MOU?
MOU.
So that's not a week, that is today. Come together, what are we currently doing around police, safety, research within 2 days, what are other places doing that are good? Minneapolis, San Francisco, get some stakeholders there. We don't have time to wait a week, because the next murder could be from our police force in our organization. And similarly, HR. Every area of HR, I want a plan within, how are you going to analyze everything from performance management, hiring, onboarding, promotion. So setting that, this is where we're going. And then people will go, I don't know how. I was talking to the dean of a college this morning. Similarly, I said, eradicating racism, and eradicating racism in our classrooms as well as our curricula. You say that, then the faculty will say, I don't know how, but if you come in saying, we're going to have another training all summer to teach you how to do it, they'll resist. You set the goal. And the final thing I'll say is, I'm using the term action teams, not working group, not committee strategic plan, but what are some of the immediate changes we can make, action teams, and say, if you want to be a part, whole community, including alumni, you want to be a part, we're looking for people who can research, look at the data, literally in a day, and then come together to say, here's what we know, here's what everybody says we should be doing. And the last thing, put up a public web page that says, we're eradicating racism. You tell us, and we know, but anything else you want us analyzing, revising with a race lens, as well as ideas for change, anybody can put it in. So you're mobilizing people, who knows how many people might do it. That's the kind of systemic, in the line of supervision, call to action, strategic, but we don't even have a month to do and sit and look at this, in my opinion. People are dying.
And what I want to relate to, as Kathy is naming, and what I was trying to emphasize as well, is we have to get determined and prioritize this work, right? That's what we have to do. Now, again, as we do that, then we deal with what happens in the doing, right? But that's fine. So people don't know how to do it. People, you know, again, and what you'll get, again, is change comes before transformation, right? And so if you're trying to hope, you know, saying direct reports, I need this report in my office, these things by next week, then you cannot do that without being ready to put in some accountabilities for if they don't do it, right? And, you know, so we've had, so everybody has to do a affirmative action report, or everybody has to do a diversity and inclusion strategic goal, right? All departments have to do that. And so, okay, so everybody who turned in their annual report had a strategic goal for diversity. Have we evaluated that? Have we assessed that? Have we held them accountable for doing that, right? And so again, folks, you will get compliance, but not culture change.
There you go.
Right? Yep. And so, you know, especially when this stuff is coming from the top. So you've got to move, you get folks to comply first, right? Then work on the transformation so that we can then begin to shift the culture.
Right. And I think the ad is there's this, there is urgency, right? We do need to create some change. We do need to transform, not create change. And culture change takes time.
That's right, it does.
So I think that there's this expectation that all of this, like we're in this high peak of doing all of this work and setting in these systems. And then the academic year starts, our organization gets busy again, right? And so how do we pay attention to not going back to business as usual? And how do we really strategically look, okay, this is what it looks in 3 years. This is what it looks like in 6 years, right? Because I think there's this, oh, we got to do everything right now. And when I see organizations and institutions do that, it's a bandage.
That's right.
And we want change, and change takes at least what, 7-10 years. And that's if everybody, all of the players are in this space and on board. And so, you know, I think that we got to recognize that it's not going to just be in this year. It's going to be in years.
That's right. Right. And I tell folks all the time, particularly as I'm working with our student leaders and even sometimes our junior faculty, you may not see the change you're working for.
Right.
You must work for it anyway. Right. And that it has to be about something that is bigger than you. Right. Because if, and you matter, it is personal, and you have to hold it as bigger than you, such that you are preparing folks behind you to continue the work. You've got to be in collaboration and in community with folks doing this work, and not just have it be all about you. If it's all about you, the resistance will show up and wait your ass out. It will wait until you burn out, fall out, run out, get pushed out, right? If it's about you, because you can't outlast the system. No, you can't, right? But if you're building a movement that is about the work, then you are in collaboration, working with others, across lines and within community, right? So that you can help to create the change.
So agree. And the other question I've been asking senior leaders is, what are the expectations you have of everyone in your organization now? Not only interpersonal, reacting to racist interpersonal aggressions, analyzing policy practice. So getting senior leaders collaboratively, getting very clear, these are the competencies we're going to hire to, hold people accountable to, train to, and we're not taking a year. And Becky, your gardening metaphor is so powerful, because there are some changes that I was talking to Dean this morning. She's like, I'm just going to say every search committee has to have an equity advocate on it. We've been talking about it for 2 years, haven't done it. I'm just going to say it. So there's some things that can be done.
That's right.
And then people are like, well, we don't have the capacity. So yes, and the deeper roots around racist attitudes, behaviors, how it's embedded in everything, the coded racism. That may take more time, but we can do some now. And just, as I agree, long haul.
Right. And I don't want us to get confused when we name, and I often will say this when I'm talking about cultural change process. I'm not talking about compliance.
Right. Nope.
I'm not talking about leadership action. Leadership action can happen overnight. You can
Yes.
say everybody will return to work tomorrow at this time, right? But that doesn't necessarily shift the culture, because now you got to deal with all of the energy and all of the attitudes around everybody showing back up at work, and what are the implications, because folks will do just what they need to do to get by, right? And what all of that looks like. So as we're talking about this, folks, we're just, again, inviting folks to know that if we're talking about real transformation, yes, there are actions that we must put in place. And if I'm going to be there in 7 years, I got to do some stuff today, right? In 5 years, I got to do some stuff today. So we're really clear that we don't have to wait 7 years for stuff to happen.
Right.
No, we can't do that. But we have to be willing to, until it becomes business as usual, right? Oh, I don't, when you hear yourself saying, I don't even remember when that wasn't the case. What do you mean? What do you mean there wasn't a person, minoritized folks on? What do you mean this search was able to go forward without this? That's not how we do stuff here. That is when the culture has been transformed.
Right.
When people can't even remember, oh yeah, I forgot we did used to do it that way, or, oh yeah, I'm glad we don't do it that way. So that's the energy that we're talking about as we talk about culture change. It's the same as I go to the airport now, when I get there and people are, got water bottles going through the conveyor belt. And I'm like, when we do that, right? You know, how long has it been since we had, you could put a water in a bottle, not just a water bottle. Like, didn't you know to take that water bottle out and empty it? That's that, you know, everybody kind of knows that.
Yeah.
Is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Take a look at your like unwritten rules and your like covert norms. Like, take a look at that, because you can do policies, right? You can put stuff into place, and that's all critical. And look at the stuff that isn't written, right? And how that is showing up in meetings. How is that showing up in retention and recruitment, onboarding? How is that showing up in the classroom? Like, look at those pieces, because those pieces are the pieces that like are some deep roots.
Thank you all. I think we only have time for one more question to get to. But what I do want to say to folks is that we're going to copy down all the questions in the Q&A, and then in subsequent offerings, we're going to see if we can address some of those there, so that we can get to answering some of the other questions. The other thing that I'll invite us to do is make sure that we're asking these same questions in our own communities, and how are we getting the answer to those questions with the folks around us, with the folks who we think get it, or the folks who are doing action and work and all that other stuff. And so that's not a consolation prize for not having these brilliant folks answering this question, but it's also a good way for us to be in practice of getting questions answered by the experts in our own spheres of influence. So the last question I'll put up there for folks is, what are the differences between investing in Black leadership and tokenism, particularly in this time where people are going to just want to, you know, move kind of abruptly without a lot of intention?
Ask it again.
What's the difference between investing in Black leadership and tokenism? Because I could even see in the question, in the answers that you had been sharing, I can see that white institutional leaders will be like, you know what we need to do now? We need to get a Black person on this one committee, or this person, the sole Black person in this whole division who's already taxed is going to have to be taxed yet again to run this new initiative. So how do you invest? And I don't know if that's the whole thing behind that question, but to me, just making the connections with what you've shared so far is, I'll just read the question again. What are the differences between investing in Black leadership and tokenism?
I think Kathy had one. Kathy, you wanted to enter? Go ahead.
I do this thing, community connections, So cross-race group, how are you doing these times? And a similar, or a person of color said, they didn't pay attention to me, and now finally the white leaders are asking. So we had a conversation about, so what do you want to say? If you want me to do this, here's what I need. And to be honest, they wanted her to write the letter. And the suggestion for me was, say, I want a seat at the table, ongoing at the leadership team meeting. So I could be wrong, and please, but I'm just saying, if we white people are again coming at you to tokenize you and just do it for us.
I like that.
What is your list of, I will do this only if,
Yeah.
and I won't do it by myself. We're talking not just me at the table, we're talking 5 people of color, indigenous folk, so that our number, right? And maybe it's like, I need a couple days to talk to some people marginalized by race. And then you come back and say, you want that? Here's what, and maybe there's also these demands that we've been making. So that's piece. And then I have more to say to white people, but we're short of time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kathy. So how to not tokenize us is to listen to what we say we need, right?
Yes.
And do it.
And do it, right? So I was going to say, here are my boundaries is one of the ways that I don't feel tokenized. So I am willing to do this. I'm not willing to do that. And what might be other expectations, especially, folks, if you are just showing up, right? If I've been talking or been present all this time and now somebody notices me because of the current state, it really does feel tokenizing, right? If we have been in relationship and we've been working together and I've been involved and my voice has mattered along, I can feel like this is just one more thing and I've been feeling overburdened around it. But if you're coming to me out of the blue, we do have a Black faculty person in chemistry. We do have, and so as a Black faculty person in the STEM fields, I need you to write the letter. So again, respect my boundaries. Here's what I will do, and here's how I will do it, and my expectations. That feels like we're in partnership and collaboration and not in tokenization, is how I would enter that.
And I think the thing that I would add to both of your brilliance is for Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, oftentimes it's really difficult to set up boundaries and needs. Because that's not a part of racism and white supremacy. We give and we give and we give and we give. And so like being clear on, this is what I need. I do need to set up these boundaries. How do I give myself agency and permission to do that shit? Right? Because that is the counter narrative to white supremacy.
That's right. It's the, Becky, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No, please.
No, go ahead.
No, it's the, so if we've not done our own internalized oppression work.
Yes.
Dr. Williams, not Washington, Dr. Tanya Williams. If we have not done our own IO work, then it is likely that we will either spin in, I have to be, I always have to do, I got to work twice as hard. We'll spin in that space, or we'll spin in the, they like me. they picked me. And so we can be in that place, and that I matter so much. Or we can spin in the resentment, right? Because we have not set the boundaries that we need. So then we blame others for how they treat us because we have not set the boundaries around how we will be treated. And we have not developed the capacity to hold the system accountable for how it makes it difficult for me to set boundaries.
Correct.
Right? No, I haven't set the boundaries. Yes, I have stayed 12 extra hours, because when I don't, here's what happens. Last week's meeting, I was dinged for this when you asked me to do this, right? And so be developing our own capacity and agency to name the systemic ways that you make it hard, the system makes it hard, the culture, the way business as usual makes it hard for me to take care of myself, right? And to set those boundaries. So all of what you said. I echo, I agree with. Yeah.
Yeah, and having heard from so many of my colleagues
Yeah.
who work on campuses saying, I know I'm being tokenized, and there's somebody put in the chat, if it not me, then who?
And who? There you
Not
go.
us, then who? We know some of that. And even from folks
Yeah.
who I know on difficult positions are feeling like they can't say no because then they get iced out of decision-making processes or influence
That's
or
right.
having a seat at the table. And so I think this is, again, where one of the things that you had all said is that being in community with each other so that all of the pressure does not fall on one person, particularly the Black folks who in most of our institutions are one of few, right? And so how do we then diffuse the responsibility of that person to be the person who's naming white supremacy, or this is, we're upholding the status quo in this meeting. Can we try to think about doing something different so that it's not everyone looking to the sole Black person or to the multicultural affairs people or to the, to write this and to do that. And so that we can put the squeeze on institutions from an accountability standpoint, not just from that one single person's, framework. And so I think that the question I would also add, because nobody asked me, but I'm going to add that it's not just what our institutions can do to not tokenize, like the leaders who can not tokenize Black folks on our campus. It's all of us. Like, how are we not, as an individual person, as a peer in our organizations and institutions, not relying and leaning on that kind of approach? So I think that it requires all of us so that that person can draw boundaries and say, here's my boundary. And then they know that they would be in a community of support.
And support,
right.
exactly.
Right? To say, oh yeah, that person's not doing that, right? So I think that's an important piece too.
I just want to say, Carmen, if I could just one quick, this question here around, which is very real around this question is, what happens when the system puts someone in place that they know won't challenge it, who looks right, that in the tokenizing way, right? And so just a quick thing. First of all, don't villainize the person, right? Recognize that they are a part of the collateral damage of this racist system, and that whatever we do, that I'm not saying don't hold them accountable and be in relationship with them to help them to see some of the dynamics and to support them to move forward. But don't make them the problem. If you have named the system as the problem, recognize it's the system that's the problem, right? And find ways, and maybe it's not you. It's like, I ain't got time, I don't have energy for that kind of person, that level of unconsciousness, I don't have time. Maybe it's not yours to do. But what I want you to do is stay out of making them the problem, because when you do, you sabotage the efforts, anything that they could do to move it along, right? So find somebody who has the capacity to talk with them, right? And let them be the persons to help move it along. No easy answers, folks. I'm not saying that's all you have to do. I'm just saying, I just want us to be careful of villainizing or making the problem the person, because it's not them.
Yeah, good add there. Okay, so we have just a little bit of time, and I do want to make sure that we are putting out in the space how we are manifesting hope, resilience, the light, right, in this, like coming to the idea of there is love and all of the other things that we've talked about in kind of multiple ways in this session, are how are we manifesting hope and resilience in these times. Each of you gets about 2 minutes.
I was supposed to start, but I led the last one. I could, but I want to check in.
You're already starting, so go ahead, Cass.
I feel hope and resilience when a white person says, yeah, but what about LGBTQ folk? There's a lot of homo. What about women? What about trans? What about anti-Semitism? And another white person says, yes, we need to continue that work, but can we just stay in race for a minute? That in this historical moment, I would like us in this meeting, in this organization, to think about how to eradicate racism. While we don't, stop other work. So do what you do well. And if your passion is anti-Semitism, first gen, yes, but do it intersecting identity. So race is centered in your work. But this organization is about eradicating racism. And as we do it, there might be other things. So that gives me hope and resilience when another white person interrupts. The other thing is white accountability groups. I can't say enough. That every time I show up with other white people and I hear what they're doing and I see myself in them and I see whites owning racist attitudes, behaviors, and committing. Every session we are making commitments, and then we start the next, what are we committing to doing, whether it's protesting, educating. So it's a both and. That's when I have hope and resilience. How is your organization creating space, investing in the healing and empowerment space for folk of color, indigenous, multiracial folk? It's got to be a high priority given all we've heard, we know. So white accountability space and affinity space, and it's not on your own time, but true investment is one thing. So that's when I have hope, when I see people doing it. And resilience, we got to be talking about self-care and community care. It's got to start with leadership, making the calls that we've been talking about on this call and putting themselves out to just do it, eradicate racism.
Thanks, Kathy.
I feel hope and resilience when I look at my grandchildren and I see their faces and the joy with which they operate in the world, and the laughter, and that just takes me there. I feel hope and resilience as I hear my partner just start to sing at any particular time of the day. That's how I know the day is started, because he is singing somewhere. Whether I'm up or not, it's time to get up. So I feel hope and resilience there. As I watch my aging pet, Taurus, my dog, just reminds me of unconditional love. The sun, the moon, the air invites possibilities because they are always there. They are still there. And so I know that we too will still be there. And so my faith grounds me in that knowing that there is more work to be done. And I get the privilege of being on the planet at this moment to be a contribution. And so when I get in spaces like this and I'm seeing all of the love, the real love that I experience as I engage these folks and some 300 plus of you out there, I feel absolute hope and possibility. I join Kathy in when dominant group members are holding others accountable, and they're holding them accountable in a joining way, in an inviting way, not a distancing way of making themselves better or shaming or blaming and so on. That also offers me hope. So yeah, and when I'm able to hold Martini, Chunky Monkey, why do I need to be in an either or space? Have both and exercise tomorrow. That's where I find hope and resilience.
Thank you.
I think I got about 30 seconds, right?
You're fine. You could
Yes, please.
As much as you want.
Construct.
Joy is resistance, right? Joy is resistance. So I'm finding my joys even while I'm in pain. To be able to hold both of those gives me hope and resilience. I am learning a lot from nature, and nature's continued, and through all kinds of things. And so I'm really learning and finding hope in quieting that around me so I can be more clear on how I'm working with organizations and how I'm showing up and how other people are showing up in their leadership around race, racism, white supremacy, class, the intersections. And seeing all of these younger than me folks being like, this shit is not acceptable.
That's right.
We got to do something different. And so that, like, those are giving me hopes and resilience. I'm finding resilience in my through my healing and remembering that I'm whole. and remembering my community as a whole.
Beautiful. I will invite us again to take a deep breath as we are wrapping up this panel and this experience together, this conversation together. And I am so grateful for our panelists today, my mentors, my family, my loves. Let's all give a round of applause to our panelists today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you for joining us from across the country. And I would invite you all to look at sjti.org for our other sessions. I want to highlight our People of Color Caucus coming up at the end of this week, and we will also be holding affinity group spaces next week. So please be on the lookout for that. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Carmen. Love you. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Craig. Thank you all for your help.
Yes, thanks to our illustrious tech team. Thank you all for making this happen and holding us together. Definitely, thank you. Appreciate that. That was a huge deal for all you did for us.